Hey everybody, it's Grace. Welcome to another video. I thought it would be fun to do another kind of the story behind the surf map. I did that for Surf Shy, and some people seem to like it, so I thought I would make another one. Why not? And this is the type of content that I, at least myself, find interesting. I would love to see more mappers, especially mappers that are much better than me, make this type of content. I think it'd be interesting to hear kind of the thought process behind the creation of different maps and how different things kind of took shape. And so yeah, I was like, I always have been a fan of if you crave a certain kind of content, it's not being made, then just make it yourself, I guess. So that's what this video is going to be about. It's going to be very rambly, don't really have any notes. I'm going to try to do minimal edits, so not really high production value here. Just be forewarned. So I guess let's go ahead and get into it. I talked about, I'm going to reference probably the video that I made about Surf Shy a few times because I learned a lot the course of making my first map. And this is being my second. I learned a lot along this process as well. And I took a lot of the things that I learned from making Surf Shy and, applied them here to Surf Suburbia. So I made Surf Shy kind of the beginning of this year. And in my video, I mentioned that maybe this was just like a one-time thing. I always told myself I wanted to make a surf map. I accomplished that goal, and on to doing other things. Right now, of course not. That's not how it goes. Start to. I felt like I just finally started to get the hang of it as soon as I finished Surf Shy. So I wanted to take some of the things that I learned and applied them to, making another map. And the process was so fun. It was difficult but fun, and so I wanted to kind of dive into this map with all the things that I've learned. So my original concept for Surf Suburbia was I wanted to make a tier 1 map. I wanted to make something really, really approachable with a really kind of, I guess, a popular type theme, being like the liminal spaces type vibe. I've always been super interested in liminal space type stuff. I made a whole video essay on a different channel about nostalgia and liminal spaces and stuff. I just love the concept, and surf maps are kind of their own liminal spaces in a lot of ways. I think the way that the source engine renders things, they always just have that vibe, and so I wanted to really lean into that with this map. And so that was my original goal, was to make a tier 1 surf map. The hard thing with that, though, and what really blows my mind about what some of the great mappers can do with tier 1 is make it approachable, obviously, so something so that a beginner could finish the map, but also something that's grindable for better surfers, and it's enjoyable for better surfers. And that's just such a hard thing to do. That's why maps, Surf, Tendies, Surf Boreas, Surf, the recently released by Pietsu, Surf Sophia, these maps that are really easy, but also super fun for even, better surfers, and they're grindable, and it's just so hard to do. I mean, the reason being, and this is something that I definitely figured out with Surf Shy being a bit of a longer linear map, it's a minute and 10 seconds to finish, on average, something like that, is, as the map progresses, the gap between what a beginner is surfing, their speed, their units, and what a really good surfer is surfing, is the gap widens, and by the midpoint of the map, it's almost a completely different surfing experience for someone that's really good versus someone that's just learning. And this is such a tough balancing act, I figured out, and it's something that I definitely kept in mind when I was making this map ultimately. But my original idea, like I said, was to make it tier 1, and I wanted to kind of break up the flow of the map by making it a 2-stage tier 1 map, both stages being fairly decent in length, 45 seconds to a minute. And that was my idea. Something like Surf Nuclear, it's another great example of a really well done tier 1 map, and I wanted to go that direction originally, and it didn't really work out for reasons I'll kind of get into shortly. The aesthetic that I was going for just wasn't happening. It wasn't exactly how I wanted. I kind of learned along the way making this that if you have a goal in mind for exactly what you want your surf map to look like, at least for me, it you're kind of almost setting yourself up for failure in a lot of ways. I think the way that I would rather do this that I did for Surf Suburbia, that I'll probably use in any future maps, is basically just find something you like that works and run with that, and not trying to like hyper focus on this vision that you have in your mind of what you want it to look like. At least that's how things work for me. So, for others, it might be different. So, my original idea was to kind of go with this like liminal green hills kind of aesthetic, with like the houses and the picket fences and stuff, to kind of match that like common famous liminal spaces picture, going for those kind of vibes. Like I said, I had a picture in my mind of what I want it to be, and I wanted the map to match this mental image. And it was really hard. So I had to learn like how to use displacements. This is like one of the first drafts of this tier 1 2-stage map that I originally had in mind. And so my kind of original idea, you can see I didn't really follow through with a lot of this, was to make a map that basically you are surfing through these like theming wise, surfing through these green hills with these houses everywhere, and then you end up at the end of the stage like flying into one of these houses, and then the second stage would like take place in like the interior of one of these kind of liminal houses. I take a shot every time I say liminal in this video. That was my original goal. This layout just wasn't quite working. I mean, it's not bad, but I just wasn't feeling it. It didn't look the way that I wanted to. I was having just a really hard time figuring out how to like meld a lot of these displacements together without, having weird issues and stuff like that, and figuring out how I'd like cover it up and stuff. And so this was kind of like one of my first attempts at it. And, all of this stuff going with this kind of Green Hills theme, it took place over like 2-3 months of just trying different stuff and trying to find ways to make this work. And and then the kind of my second iteration of it was this, which was a little bit better. You can kind of see that I had more of the idea in mind with the houses and stuff like that. Obviously I didn't continue this as well, but I actually made a whole like surf layout. This one was a bit better. It had like skips included, so it could be more fun for better surfers, such as like you come down here and you can jump onto this ramp if you're newer, or you can kind of hug this displacement and go all the way down to this ramp, stuff like that. Part of the problem was that I got some different feedback from some people on this layout. Big shout out to like King Curtis and Ellie, who took a look, and it was a bit fast. Like it was just a little too quick, which has been a kind of a problem with some of my creation so far, is you just get too much speed too quickly. That gap, like I said, between good surfers and bad surfers kind of widens. And also it was mentioned by King Curtis that sometimes like hugging displacements when you're going around corners can create issues and be a bit inconsistent. And I just wasn't really satisfied with the way that the like visuals turned out either. So I ended up kind of scrapping this idea as well, though I kind of like the flow of the map to a certain extent. Maybe it's something I'll reuse for a bonus or something down the road. I don't know. But that was kind of, what I'd worked on for a while. I took a break for a bit. And then King Curtis suggested the idea of like maybe instead of, using these like green hills, if you use just like a blank black background and, with like street lights and stuff, and you're kind of like surfing at night through a neighborhood. And I really liked that idea, and I thought I'd test it out a bit and, kind of go from there. And as you can tell by, the Surf Suburbia video, that's kind of where the direction I ended up going. So yeah, big shout out to King Curtis. That was kind of instrumental, that idea was, in getting this whole map, up and running, and, getting the idea how I wanted it to be. So I had another separate server where I was testing out another separate map where I was testing out aesthetics. And this is something that I will always do for future projects. I think it's the same thing I did for Surf Shy, where I'm basically just plugging in different textures and just making little shapes and stuff until like I get the vibe that I want to go for. And then I use that and pretty much take that and move that aesthetic into the actual map itself when it comes to the detailing portions of it. And I think this is something, like I said, I'll do a lot in the future. As far as like what I can do visually with surf maps, I'm not that great with Hammer still. I don't know a lot of like advanced techniques, how to make things look really, really nice. So, there's some maps that use particles and use a lot of things to really like increase the like environmental vibes, I guess, that make things look really, really cool. And I just don't have that ability. So my kind of goal and my kind of, I guess, like trademark or whatever is like finding just a simple color palette of things that I think look really good together, and then taking that simple color palette and using that throughout the whole map. And that's kind of, what happened with Surf Shy. That's what happened with Surf Suburbia. And that'll be kind of what will happen with future maps, I imagine. That's really what I like doing most is, more of the detailing is not in cool like particles or doing any interesting effects, more the actual just color palette and doing a lot of brush work to try to make the map look good. And I do at least feel like that's something that is one of my strengths, is doing brush work and like doing a lot of it, and really spending a lot of time on each room so that every little area has details and stuff. So this was the that's not right, map surf, there we go. This was where I was just testing out aesthetics, and as you can see, this is kind of the idea that ended up ultimately becoming Surf Suburbia. So I made these houses, just made them and then turned them into props, and I was testing out this kind of like night void vibe that King Curtis suggested with the street lights and stuff like that. You can see the houses originally had these like picket fences with the grass and stuff, but I ended up scrapping that, but just testing out the idea. And so, I kind of came to the conclusion this looks really cool. I like it. And then, the idea being, you like go into one of these houses, and then, the interior is kind of like that. It's very like, it was popular in America in like the like late 90s, early 2000s, this kind of like faux Tuscan aesthetic, I guess, with the like kind of sand tan colored walls and the white trim, stuff like that. And so I really like this. And so this was kind of the vibe that I was a big fan of. You can see the inspiration starting to put these kind of like walls in here to make it look like a labyrinth in a way. And so that was the vibe that I liked. And so I basically made this, and I said, okay, this is how I'm going to detail the map itself. And so then I went into the actual map making itself. So we'll go to the map, if I can spell, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the elements and some of the kind of thought processes behind a lot of it. So let me just fly around here a little bit. So like I said, I wanted to kind of go with the night vibe, and I had the aesthetic that I liked. I had the color palette I was going for, and then from there, I just kind of let the kind of creativity dictate what I wanted to do with it. I thought about like adding these little like pillars and stuff. I really like the way that they look. It kind of reminded me of like bird houses in a way, and I really tried not to think too much about like the reasoning or the logic behind a lot of the decisions, a lot of the like visual choices. It was more just like, oh, okay, that looks cool, let's do that. And so that's ultimately what I ended up doing. So yeah, this map, as far as like the surf itself, I definitely leaned on a lot more curved ramps. This is something that I really need to experiment more with and get better at, is using curved ramps. Surf Shy had like 2-3 curved ramps total. So I wanted to really like push myself on this, and there is a lot of curved ramps in this map, probably more than I would use in the future. Maybe I overdid it, some would say. And also curved ramps are just really tedious. One thing you'll notice is that some of the ramps have a smaller base, and then some of them like this have a larger base. That's because I discovered with certain curved ramps, when you use too small of a base, it breaks the ramp. There's ramp bugs, and I had a ton of those while making this. And so basically this whole section, up to here, I had all like laid out. I had kind of the idea. Now a lot of this stuff has changed slightly, but I had the idea for, okay, so I like the flow of this, blah, 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 blah. But basically from here on out, it was all, it changed like 8 times. The whole layout of the second half of the map basically changed so many times. I just wasn't satisfied with the flow of it. I kept changing things, And I got so sick of like working on Surf, the actual ramps layouts itself, that I ended up just starting to detail first. So this was kind of interesting. I always thought like what I did with Surfshy and what I would probably do in the future is like lay out all the ramps, get the surf layout, and then detail all of it. But for this map, interestingly enough, I laid all of this out and detailed all of it, and I still didn't have the surf set in stone for the second half of the map. So this was all kind of basically I had all of this detailed up to here. As far as the detailing, like I said, I kind of mentioned the roads and all that stuff. With the exterior, I was going for some kind of like obviously a bit liminal, but also maybe a bit I guess, what do you call it, like Salvador Dali. What did he do? I don't know, whatever. I wanted to go with some of that type stuff as well, just finding stuff that I liked and thought was fun. I used the same kind of like color lights from Surfshy, those yellow warm lights. I like those a lot. And I thought, if it's broke, don't fix it. It's going to be a bit different theme anyway. And I like the lighting in that one. I like the lighting in this one. So I just kind of went with it. And then for the interior, I think the one thing that, is probably could be criticized is that it is a lot of this tan texture. It's everywhere and it's a very flat texture. So I know that can be kind of annoying. It creates some weird kind of shadow things sometimes like this. But to me, like those kind of like imperfections, those don't really like, I don't know. For me, like I don't really care too much. It is what it is. I'm not going to like bash my head against the wall trying to fix some of the weird shadows that it creates and stuff like that. It's just not that huge of a deal to me. So it was a really plain color palette. I went with like a carpet and the tan walls and then the white trim and then basically the texture on the ramps. And that's really it. There's a different texture on these little fence things that I made. But yeah, really a very, very simple color palette. I don't know if I would go this simple in the future. I think I'd like to have more kind of, contrast of color and stuff in, other projects. But I think for this map, it kind of works. It kind of, it suits what I was trying to go for and what I aim to do. And so, as I'm detailing, I'm just trying to make every space seem a little bit interesting, make it look kind of labyrinth-like. Like there's all these different kind of ways that you can go. It reminded me in some ways of like a conference center or like a hotel, even more than a house, even though I kind of called it Surf Suburbia. But, whatever. Like I said, I just kind of, found some things that I liked and just ran with it. So I went with a ton of these different, little nooks and crannies and tried to put fences around some of them, like these balconies, to really just make it look like it was a real space that like you could travel through and navigate around. And I really liked the vibe of how a lot of these interior rooms turned out. I like the idea of doing some of these like voids that you could like fall into or whatever, alongside like balconies that overlook them. I made these pillars. You'll find these everywhere, all over the map, but that was basically it. And then just every room, I just tried to kind of make it its own. This space, I tested out with lighting a little bit, and I sent like a really rough draft of this with just one or two of these like red lights. I sent them to Ellie, and they commented and said they really liked the kind of vibe of this. So I took it a little bit further, and so included kind of both of these rooms to have these red lights, just to kind of change up the vibe just a little bit for kind of the mid portion of the map. And so I made some of these stairs, and then just kind of went with different kind of things. I had a bunch of space over here. It was just like void. So I thought, why not, build a kind of room over here that looks like another kind of area that could be explored. Just trying to make everything dynamic and, make every little area that you could look interesting. One of the things I will mention about like my maps is if you look backwards, there really isn't a lot to look at. I've always kind of keep it in mind of like what the actual surfing is happening, like what direction you're facing when you're surfing. And so if you look backwards, I didn't put a ton of detailing work into that. So if you're like no clipping around the map, it might not look as good, but I don't really care. I really wanted to focus just on the actual surfing experience itself. And so at some point I wanted to have it where you kind of come back out into the like neighborhood type vibe. So I did that here. This portion of the map is right up against the like border up with the like the grid the hammer grid. So I kind of had to work with it and do some different stuff. That's why some of the transitions and stuff through here are not my favorite part of the map, of all the sections, just because like this is right up against the border. So I basically just had a pretty simple 180 here and continued on like, this, I could have gone more directions with it, but I needed to get away from this edge. So I kind of moved this direction. This transition's a little weird. It's not, my favorite, but it's fine. But I'm pretty, critical of my own stuff. As far as like the surf itself, I'm pretty happy with it. Like I almost like the flow of Surfshy just slightly more, the actual surf itself. But I don't know. I think this is it's decent. I definitely like the visuals more on this map. I think that a lot of what I learned helped a lot with this. I think like I said, I might have overdone it slightly with the curved ramps, but it's fine, honestly. And some of the ones that were the biggest pains were like these ones that were curved, but they were at an angle. And so figuring out how to like angle fix these and make them so that there wasn't bugs was a massive headache. I do really love these last couple ramps, how they flow together. I love the vibe of this last room. I was going to mention something earlier. I can't remember. Oh yeah. One of the things that I can also see people being critical with the map is like a lot of the blind turns and stuff like that. And it's a similar thing with Surfshy. Personally, I just really like blind turns. I like some of that stuff. It's nice when you have some visual cues to help you out, and I try to include some of those. For example, like this white line basically lines up with the bottom of this ramp. So trying to do little stuff like that to kind of like visually indicate where you go helps. But, to me, blind turns, like they can be somewhat annoying, but also, if you just play the map once or twice, you start to learn, the height that you should go and where you should go and stuff like that. I don't think it's that big of like a detriment to the map. So yeah, there definitely are some, blind turns and stuff like that. But that was basically it. So I kind of, like I said, I detailed up to the midpoint of the map, and then I basically created the surf for a room, and then I would detail that room. I'd create the surf for the next room, then I detail that room basically all the way till the end. And the ramps, the layout changed a lot. It changed a ton. All the different things I wanted to do. Certain ramps were breaking, so I had to try different things and mess around with different ideas and stuff like that to get something that I really liked. But like I said, I like to focus on a simple palette and then just let the brushwork do the work, I guess you can say. And that's definitely something I did. There's plenty of things to criticize about this map, but probably like can't criticize that I didn't put time into it. I put a lot of time into every single room. I'd spend hours on every room just trying to add as many little details as possible to make it visually dynamic and interesting or whatever. And please let it be known, like I'm making this video talking about my map. Don't get it twisted. I don't have some sort of like superiority complex and believing that my map and what I made is any better than anything else. I definitely don't think so. I think that there are much better mappers out there. I just simply wanted to make a video talking about like my own creative process on it, and I think that covers most of it. One of the things that was a really big help was that I talked to Ellie about was mentioning the idea of like copying other elements from other maps. And originally I was like, why would you do that? Like, why wouldn't you just, create your own like surf itself? But it's really true that, certain elements that you can like take, from other maps and kind of make it your own really do help the flow of it, especially when you play a map you really like and you love this certain element or this certain transition. And so I did some of that. I definitely did a little bit of like ripping the ideas. This transition right here from basically this ramp, kind of floating up off of the curved ramp into, basically a 180 turn and landing on this downward sloping, flat ramp. This was taken from Surf Wasteland 1 or 2, I believe. I discovered those maps not too long ago. Super cool. Like that's exactly the type of surf that I love. Am I saying that right? Wasteland? Is it Wasteland? I don't remember. But yeah, I really love those maps, and they influenced this in some ways, and plenty of other maps did as well. That's basically it. As far as the bonuses, bonus 1 I made myself. It was basically an idea that I had for a different map that I just kind of scrapped. And so that ended up being bonus 1, which is right here. Yeah, big shout out to Kavo and Taiki for bonuses 2 and 3. This was the first time that I like asked anybody to make, you know, a bonus for me or ask them to, and so I did the detailing for those to kind of fit the theme, and I was pretty happy with how it all turned out. So yeah, this was basically an idea for another map that I had that I kind of stopped on. I had built the surf pretty much all the way up to this ramp right here, and it was going to be like a longer linear, but I was like, let's just end it, make it a bonus. So I just kind of added this ramp and the final area, and then, you know, called it a day. I guess I'll mention as well, as far as the like difficulty of the map, it ended up being around a tier 2, which kind of tracks. You know, like I said, originally I was trying to make a tier 1, and it was just too hard. I just couldn't get that balance right, and I ultimately decided just to go with another tier 2 map, and that's probably how many of my maps will be in the future if I make more, is just going with the kind of surf that I like, what I find fun, and hopefully other people enjoy it as well. I mentioned in my other video, I'm not the greatest surfer. I finished like 2 tier 3 maps at this point. So I definitely like to kind of make easier stuff that I can enjoy. But also in this map, what I think I did much better about than in Surf Shy is taking the like better surfers' speed into consideration, you know, so that the experience is enjoyable, so that it flows well. For example, let me move around a little bit. For example, these sections right here where you're jumping like up and over something, these type of elements I wouldn't include later in the map, because, you know, basically a noob would have a hard time, you know, having the speed to get over it, and a better player would carry too much speed, which would make the transition to the next ramp awkward. So I thought about a lot of that stuff, tried to keep some of that in mind. I think I did a much better job about this than in Surf Shy, so that's something I'm definitely proud of. The surf itself is not super like unique. I know that, you know, I like the flow of it. I'm happy with it, though I know there's not like anything new or, you know, novel about what I'm doing, and that's okay. That's really like what I'm kind of going for. There are, you know, mappers like King Curtis and others who do a lot of really cool, innovative ideas, and, you know, like breathe, you know, fresh life into what surf can be, and that is amazing, and I applaud them for it. For me, I'm like a bit of a like traditionalist, I guess. I really like just simple, smooth, flowing surf, and so those are the kind of maps that I'm gonna try to make. You know, that's what I like, and that's what I want to do. I want to make the type of surf maps that I want to play myself, and that's kind of how it will be, you know, in the future, unless I really change up what I'm wanting to do creatively. So that's it. That's Surf Suburbia. I wanted to say thanks again for everybody that I shouted out in the preview video, the showcase video. Just so much help. The KSF Surf Mapping Discord, and so many others that, you know, help make this possible, and you know, help make this all happen. It means a lot. This community is really cool, and you know, getting to be a part of it, and, you know, getting to submit my maps is just a blast, and I really enjoy doing this. You know, we'll see if you know, more projects are, you know, coming in the future. I want to try to elevate every map I make. I want everything to be better than the last, and like I said, I take back what I said earlier. I said, you know, I like the surf more on Surf Shy, a little more than this. Not necessarily. I think it's about on the same level, but I definitely like the visuals more with this. So hopefully in the next map, I kind of elevate both. I want the surf to be even better, and I want the visuals to be even better. I think with a future map, I'm going to go with a little bit of a more complex palette, color palette, just to kind of mix things up a little bit, and we'll see what happens. One of the things you'll notice I haven't used in any of my maps yet is a skybox, and still haven't messed around with a ton of that stuff. I tried with some of the like Green Hills versions of this, but it just wasn't working. So we'll see what happens in the future. This was, like I said, rambly, long, but yeah, thanks for anyone that watched, enjoyed this video. Hope you guys enjoy the map. If not, all good, I understand. But yeah, that's all I've got. Thanks so much for watching, and yeah, I'll see y'all around. Peace.